Okay, well, welcome everybody. We're going to be talking about developing effective warm-ups and cooldowns in this webinar. We'll start off slow. We still have a few people trickling in, but I'll go ahead and get the ball rolling so we can get moving. We have quite a bit of information to cover, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions and answers. I'm hoping that there will be some questions and answers, so please feel free to do that. Before we start, just a real quick administrative process. The webinar system that we use, GoToWebinar, has two different styles to it. There's kind of an older version or classic, and there's a newer one. So if you're on the older version or the classic version, and especially if you're on a computer, you'll have a kind of a control panel on the side of your screen, and it'll have different tabs. If you want to ask a question, just go to the questions tab and you can type that in, and we'll be able to address that. And then we'll be taking some polls, so you'll be able to type in the polls. We do have a handout for this particular webinar. So you'll go to the handout tab and you can download it from that particular tab. If you're in the newer version, it's kind of a black screen. There'll be information across the top. So you want to go to the different questions and handouts across the top, and that's where you can find the information as well. So do download the handout. That will have some helpful information and links to things that will be able to demonstrate a lot of the stuff that we're talking about through videos to our exercise library, etc. So you can see some of the things and not just see a still picture of it on this webinar. And before we start, again, on behalf of Eleiko, I want to thank you, myself and Patrick Warmel, who's our tactical education manager. He's on the call as well. He's behind the scenes doing the brain work, so he's going to be available to answer questions. If you guys have questions as we go through, feel free to ask them, and he might be able to help address some of those as we go through. If it's a pretty basic question and it's not too hard to type out or too long. If they're pertinent, he'll interrupt me, and we'll be able to answer him right then and there if it's specific to what I'm talking about at that moment. And or at the very end, I want to reserve time that we can get through and talk about as many or discuss many questions that we can to address your guys' applications and how you see it or what you're thinking and feeling and what you want to know more specifically based off the presentation. So all that said, my name is Rodney Korn. I'm the Director of Education. I've been in the industry for about 25 years as an educator. Patrick Warmel, he's been in the industry for a good decade or so. He's a little bit younger than I am. He's got a little more juice, a little more fire, but he's been in the tactical world doing a lot of stuff. He's the one who oversees our U.S. Navy contract. So we provide education for the United States Navy, among all the other things that we do. And he oversees that. That's his specialty, and he's extremely good at it. So I want to thank you. Before we jump into this now, getting to the meat and potatoes, just want to ask a couple of questions so I know who you are, so I can best tailor the information and speak to you guys as we go through this information. So Patrick, if you want to start with the first poll, this one's just basically who are you? Which one of these best represent who you are? Are you a strength conditioning coach, personal trainer, you're an athlete, fitness enthusiast, owner, operator, or other? That would be great. Thank you guys. Deeply appreciate your participation. So we got a lot of strength conditioning coach, personal trainers on this. That's awesome. Quite a few fitness enthusiasts. Beautiful. Typically, other tends to mean some type of licensed professional, whether it's a physiotherapist, chiropractor, massage therapist, or whatnot. So, okay. And then the last poll that I want to ask is this your first Eleiko strength talk? Yes or no? Try to keep it simple. Excellent. So about a 50-50 split, not bad. All right, so thank you guys. Appreciate you taking the time to do that. So let's get into this presentation and get specific with what we're going to be talking about here. Okay, so we're going to get into the cool downs, how to develop them, how to make them effective and useful, practical, and more specifically, based upon who you are. So let's talk about real quick some objectives that I want to get to. Want to define our terms. One of the biggest things in the industry, after being in it for so long, we hear a lot of terms thrown out, and we're going to have some today, but they never define what they are. Researchers do this a lot, never define what they're actually talking about. We hear a lot of terms in the industry, never know what they are, so we're going to define them. We're going to discuss kind of where we currently are right now with the whole warm up and cool down process, and then want to add some things to it based on some of the concepts and principles that we're going to explain as we go through this. So we're going to start with a little bit of an introduction of what some of the basic components are of warm-ups and cool-downs, what that looks like. But then we're going to dive into what are the principles and concepts that are vital to building these effective strategies. What do we need to know about how the human body operates and how it functions, tissues, etc. And what does that mean, and how should that influence our warm-up and cool-down processes? We're going to then provide some practical applications. So we're going to take this information, we're going to turn it into here's what you can or should be thinking about when you're doing warm-ups and cool-downs. And then hopefully we can get some questions and answers. Make sure that you guys are able to ask what you want to know. So again, this is very specific to you. All right, so the first thing, warm-up. What is a warm-up? So when you look at the research or when you hear people talk, depending on who you are and what you base all of your information on, usually it's some type of lower intensity preparation time where we're doing low intensity movements, activities, or exercises, things of that nature. What I want to really draw out, and what you guys will see, and we'll have some visuals as we go through this, I want you to think of the warm-up and the cool-down. They are transition periods. So we're actually transitioning into training and or competition, depending on what you're doing, by using these lower intensity movements, activities, and exercises, which are very general words that will start to bring out the specific meanings of what are we talking about movements and activities and exercises. Okay, so it's a transition period. The purpose is to ramp the system up. And we'll have a graphic that'll talk about this. We want to ramp the system up and get it prepared to what we're going to be doing with it. This is done through increasing our temperature, increasing blood flow. These are some of the typical things that you will look at if you've seen research or you've gone through a certification, depending on what your level of background is. These are some of the things that you will see or hear. Increased the tissue temperature, increased blood flow, increase, this is one I love, and we will really dive into this one a little bit later on in just a few minutes. Increase the free coordinated movement and neuromuscular readiness. Never defined, they just use these words because it sounds great, but we're going to define it. We're going to tell you, I'm going to show you what that means and how vitally important that is to understanding what we should be doing, what we should be thinking about when we're building our warm-ups and cool-downs. We're going to talk about this using the term activation. Activation is another term that is used in the industry, but it's not very well defined. So we're going to define it based upon how we at Eleiko have built our whole warm-up and cool-down process and strategies on. Just so you know, a lot of this information we're going through is already in a course that we have called the Readiness and Recovery Training course. You can get online, and you can see that at the end of this. But just to set the stage, we're going to talk about what that means and how that works. The other things that we should be thinking about that you won't hear a lot is the increase in circulation and lubrication of the tissues. That's vital, and I'll expand on that a little bit more and show you some visuals of that. It's also, your warm-up has a tremendous impact on decreasing the risk of injury, and I can't stress that enough, because as you prepare for what you're doing, you set the stage for the body to be able to accomplish that task. We'll dive into that a little bit. And ultimately, what very few people will ever say, and we've already talked about this in previous webinars, is it initiates the recovery process. Your recovery process does not start at the end of a training session. It actually starts at the very beginning of the training session. And if that's a new concept to you, then that's something that you're going to want to dive into more. And I strongly suggest download the download that we have for you. go to the download tab, click on that, download that PDF file, because there'll be links in there. We just completed a webinar series a few months ago with the training results and how to maximize your training results. We talked about the role of recovery. We talked about preventing injury. And those two webinars have a vast amount of information that will be vital to understand in order to help you build better warm-ups and cooldowns that have true effectiveness. All right. Traditionally, the components that we see are, there's a low intensity aerobic activity, which is kind of your general, and that's to warm the body up. So they call them warm-ups because we want to warm the body up. That actually came from research that's showing that it's done with animals, if you warm the tissue by 1 degree Celsius, that it's more tolerant to forces being placed on it, just to keep it real simple. So they said, okay, well, we got to warm the tissue up. So typically, to warm the tissue up, people use low intensity aerobic exercise. They get on a bike, get on a treadmill, they do a rower, they do something like that. They jog in place, jumping jacks. And that's all good. There's nothing wrong with any of that stuff, but we're going to try to hone in on how can we be most effective or more effective, perhaps. There's a flexibility or stretching or mobility, whatever term that you use or people use, and they say that's to increase range of motion. So we're going to play on that one a little bit. We're going to pan that out and understand, because most people don't understand how we actually get range of motion and where range of motion comes from in the body. We just do these things because we're told, because we live in an industry where we don't want to know why to do something. We just want to know what to do. But if you don't know why something happens or how the body actually works, then what you're being told to do, you don't know if it works or not, or if it's the actual right process to do. So we're going to talk about that in minor detail as we go through this. And then there's the training or sport specific exercises. So typically there's 3 components. There's a general warm up. There's a little bit of flexibility stuff in there because we need range of motion, never defined. And then we want the training or more sport specific exercises to prepare us for the movements that we're going to do in the session or in the competition. Some things that we don't really hear a lot about are breathing. Breathing is, well, 1, it's essential, but 2, it's actually vital in a warm-up or a cool-down process, because you can almost instantaneously, within seconds, change the atmosphere of the body, change its ability to either ramp up or to calm down, which is essential for warming up or cooling down. So breathing is a massive component of it. That in and of itself is a whole presentation, but we're just going to talk about breathing, and we'll just mention it as we get to the different aspects. And then we're going to dive in more to activation, because we never have activation. We're always talking about increasing range of motion through flexibility, stretching, and mobility, which is typically forcing the body to do something that it not necessarily can do right at the moment. So we'll talk about those a little bit. The cool down, think of this as a transition. This is a transition out of the training or competition using lower intensity movements and or activities, exercises, etc. Essentially, the purpose is to return or calm the system down. We want to ramp it up to get it going, and then we want to calm it down on the way out. And we want to lower the temperature. We want to create a little bit more of an anabolic setting for the body. Training is a catabolic, it's breaking the tissue down. We want to try to create a more anabolic as we leave the session. In reality, we can do that through the whole warm up and cool down. And that's talked about in the Maximizing Your Training Results webinar series. So please go see that if you haven't. Want to maintain the blood flow, the circulation, and the lubrication of tissues. One of the things you'll notice if you look at cooldowns is cooldowns aren't very well defined. It's just like, when you finish, you just want to kind of slow the body down. And so most people stretch. That's one of the biggest things. If you look at, that's the time to stretch. You want to stretch the muscles that you've been using, but nobody ever says why and what could be the potential ramifications of doing that and doing that too much. So we want to start creating a little bit better parameters and be a little bit more precise based on the principles, which are the truths of how the body works and the concepts that we may hear about a lot but don't understand. So we don't just, you don't just kind of cool down by getting on a bike for 5 minutes. That will help for sure. And there's nothing bad or wrong about it. So I don't want anyone to leave this webinar saying, We're telling you not to do things. What we want to do is expose things so you have a clear understanding of when you do something, how may it work or not work for you, and why would that be? So you can start making better choices. Whether you're a coach or trainer working with other people, which is essential to get the results and the buy-in from your clientele, or if you're a fitness enthusiast and athlete on your own, that you're actually preparing yourself and you have more knowledge than what you're going to typically read in a magazine or on YouTube or Instagram or wherever you're getting information. So we're just going to try to fill in some blanks and give you a little bit of foundation. If you're an owner or operator of a facility and you have people that you're responsible for, this is essential because they need to know how to effectively do that and build these strategies to make them simple and effective. And that's what we're going to try to lay out. So again, back to the purpose. Lower tissue temperature, maintain the blood flow, circulation, and lubrication that you should have gained in your warm-up and been able to maintain through your session. You want to leave with that. You don't want to just let it go and then everything changes on you. It just starts to harden and stiffen. The last thing here is we want to maintain that free and coordinated movement, or the neuromuscular readiness, which you call activation. That one is essential, and that's the one that is probably rarely, if ever, used because it's not understood, the vitalness of it. So we will go through that. Okay, so let's get to the principles and concepts right now. And I'm assuming we have no questions, so I'm just going to go ahead and bolt on through. So the first thing we need to understand, and some of you may have seen this if you've seen some of the other presentations, we need to understand how the body responds to training. When we work out, when we train, what happens? First thing, there's a normal inflammation process. That's the red line that you see going up with those dark triangles. The inflammation process will immediately start to happen. That's a good thing. We need inflammation. It helps you. We'll talk about that in a second. You have to have inflammation. But as we get that inflammation response, we also have a decrease or a hindrance in our strength and our range of motion, which is the light blue circle you see down at the bottom of that. So these things drop, we lose range of motion, and we lose strength, or the ability of the muscles to activate properly. The pain, which you see the open triangle, is basically associated. The greater the pain, the greater the loss of motion. And that's a result of inflammation. Inflammation is what triggers pain. Pain is a result of inflammation because it's a swelling process within the tissues and the way that it stimulates receptors. Okay, so as the pain goes up because of inflammation, that's the point. Usually the highest point of pain is the lowest point of your range of motion. Inflammation rises. So as we get an increase in inflammation, that's actually the cleaning response. We have to have inflammation in order to create recovery or to get the tissues to heal. That's the healing response in the body. That's the immune system at work. So you can see as the inflammation continues to go up, the pain starts to go down. We have metabolic waste products that are going out of the system, and everything's starting to come back to its normal. If this would go longer, you would get those to go back to a normal state in a normal situation. What I want you to notice is that this is over a 5-day period. Now, this is with people who are unaccustomed to training. So these are kind of new people who are training and using a fair bit of eccentric loading. But you can see it could be up to 5 to 7 days before you get back to normal. And most of us don't realize that even though we train, especially if we're training hard, it may not be the 48-hour window that we're all told you got to wait 48 hours and then you just go ahead and train. That's not necessarily true. It depends upon you and all the other factors and all the other stressors that are coming into your body. So first off, you have to know this. When we train, there is going to be a response that's going to create a detriment to range of motion and a detriment to our strength, which is the activation. So we need to be aware of that, because we have to counter that later on. Okay? No, inflammation, though necessary, will decrease muscles' ability to activate and your range of motion. So here's kind of what that looks like. This is a picture that you can have to kind of summarize what we're talking about. When you start to do your training session, or you have stress that's coming into the body, as a training session would be, you immediately have a fatiguing response. That fatiguing response is the trigger to create a fitness response. In that fatigue response, that's where we have the stress response, so to speak, and that's where the inflammation is initiated. That's a good thing, because we need that inflammation to get into the system to create healing so we can get more fitness or enhance our performance. The recovery process is when we start to decrease in the inflammation and we start to decrease the amount of fatigue that's in the system. But that's a long road. I don't mean long like in months, it's just a longer road. It doesn't happen just overnight and immediately. So think of that as you see the bucket on the right-hand side. You got all these different stressors coming into your body, and it's not just the workout, it's everything that happens into your body that summates into stress that the body has to cover. Your workout is just additional stress on top of everything else that you have in life. So all of that stress, all the things you do when you're training, it has to come out of that bucket in order to get recovery. So the recovery is all the holes, letting the water out of that bucket. As your recovery goes and you start to heal and your body starts to repair itself, that's what determines your readiness. You can think of this as neuromuscular readiness. You can think of this as overall general readiness, that your body is able to do what you want it to do at the moment that you want it to do it right now. So, and we'll talk about how we can address this. So this is the readiness that's based upon your recovery. And when you get to a certain point, when the body has had enough recovery, that is now a recovered state. So realize the difference between recovered and recovery. Recovery means you're in the process. Recovered means you've gotten to the point where the process is completed. It is finished. The inflammation cycle has finished, and now we're at a point that's low enough to where we have optimal fitness and optimal readiness. That's your optimal state to start another training session, to compete, whatever you want to do. That's the optimal. You'll notice recovered doesn't get all the way to the black line. That's because we're always under stress. We live in gravity. Gravity is a stress. So if you get to the flat line, the black line, you're dead. It means that's not a good place to be. There's no fitness there. All right. So there's an optimal recovered state. Now, if you don't know how to assess that, which is vital if you're going to train, and that's vital to understand what should I be doing for a warm-up, and then how should I be cooling down. So if you don't know what it is, and you don't know how to weigh, you don't know whether you're at the optimal yellow dotted line or the one on the left. Because that's still, it's more recovered than the immediate response, but it's still not in a state of true recovery. You haven't recovered fully yet. So how do you know whether you're there or even lower, or potentially over recovered, meaning that you've waited too long before you've trained? And this happens a lot of times with athletes who've taken time off, or they've had summer break and then they get back into training, or they've had a winter break and they get back. So there's an optimal zone, but where does it lie, and how do you know which yours are before you go train? If you don't know that, you're shooting in the dark. You don't know if your body's ready to do what you want it to do, and this is why we get so many injuries. Now, if you're one of the ones on the left, if you're towards the left end where you have those two yellow dotted lines, a proper warm-up can actually move you closer to an optimal readiness if you know what to do. If you have the right components in your warm-up and you're addressing the right properties of the body and tissues, you can actually shift that to the right to get in a more optimal state. That's what a warm-up should do for you. But that doesn't mean just swinging your arms and legs and then going at it. So we have to find out what that means. So keep that in mind. Now there's another thing. I want to talk about range of motion. Here's how range of motion works, and we're going to keep this really simple. But in very simplistic, basic neurophysiology, this is how the body gets range of motion. And I haven't heard anyone ever say this, because we always say, you force the body into position, take it and stretch it as far as it'll go, add weight to it and push it and overload it to create stress. That's not how the body actually does allow range of motion. Can you override the system to do that? Yes, you can, but there are side effects to that. And when you look at the research based on, you look at you look at the high level research where they do a meta-analysis and a systematic review of all the literature that's out there. And what you'll find as a trait is when people do stretching and a lot of stretching, that does not provide benefit to the warm-up. It doesn't necessarily hurt you, but in and of itself, it doesn't provide the benefit. You have to have certain components because they don't say anything about it. They just say don't do it, but they're not telling you why. We're going to tell you why you want to be careful about just cranking on limbs, forcing your calves to stretch, forcing your pecs or whatever, because there's a reason why it may or may not work. You can get it to change, but it doesn't mean it's actually doing the body benefits. So let's talk about what that means. It's a process called reciprocal inhibition. And all that means is when some muscles shorten, opposing muscles should be allowed to lengthen. So whenever you move, whenever you are stretching or doing something, you think you're lengthening something, but in order to lengthen something, something else has to shorten. Something always has to shorten for something to lengthen in the body. Okay, that's paramount. And if that's new to you, then process that for a second. In order to stretch something or to get length in something, something else has to shorten somewhere in the body. So reciprocal inhibition is how that's supposed to happen. So as muscles shorten, their receptors, which are called muscle spindles, send the information to the body. When a muscle is shortening, it's sending information to the central nervous system, letting it know that, hey, I'm shortening. The central nervous system will immediately tell the opposing muscles through the nerves. They go to the spinal cord, and then a message goes to the opposing muscles to say, hey, we need you guys to just relax for a little bit so you can go ahead and lengthen. It decreases the neural drive. So the key is, as long as the central nervous system is receiving input from the muscle spindles that a muscle is shortening, the opposing muscles will be allowed to lengthen, and that's where you'll get proper range of motion and you'll get full range of motion. If that muscle spindle is working properly, that's the key. If it's working properly, then as you think you're stretching something, if I'm stretching my pec, then my whole rear delts and other musculature has to shorten. If the muscle spindles are working and sending information there, then I will have full range of motion. And as long as those work, I have full range of motion. So the key is the muscle spindle in the shortening muscle, because the keynote is muscle spindle function dictates muscle activation and the range of motion of a joint. Just pulling on a muscle and lengthening it, yes, the research will show you that you can increase range of motion over time, but what it doesn't tell you is it actually creating a stable joint? Does it actually create proper activation of that musculature? That's why you have so much conflicting research, and why the research will say stretching has this deleterious effect on the muscle function. So keep that in mind, because we're going to talk about that. The muscle spindle is what we need to be thinking about, not is my muscle tight somewhere. If something doesn't shorten, something won't lengthen. So if something's not lengthening, if your calves are always tight and they're not lengthening, it has nothing to do with your calf. It's not the muscles of the calf that are the problem. It's muscles that are supposed to dorsiflex the foot. That's where the issue may lie, one of the areas that it may lie. So you may have weak tibialis anterior, weak anterior muscles or shin musculature that's not able to shorten, so the calf can't lengthen via reciprocal inhibition. It's a simple process. Okay, so now let's go to free coordinated neuromuscular readiness. What the heck does that actually mean? In simplicity, it means it's an unhindered precision of timing and activation. It's free, there's no hindrance, and the coordination is I have proper timing and activation. In other words, it's the ability of our bodies, our central nervous system, to turn muscles on and off at the exact precise time. That has to happen. Multiple muscles. Anytime we move, anytime we do any movement, there are multiple muscles which have multiple motor units each in those muscles, and they all must be able to turn on and off with precision to perform any movement. One, that's based on the muscle spindles in all those muscles. Are the spindles actually working properly? And two, does the nervous system have the ability to turn that switch on and off? Yes or no? Is it getting proper feedback, and is it able to send the information to the muscles properly? Okay, so we have to have precise timing in every movement. When we don't, that's where we have breakdown. So if one muscle, whenever movement you do, it doesn't matter what you do, if you're squatting, if you're running, if you're sitting, if you're twisting, if you're bending, if one muscle in that whole framework, or even motor unit components, the components of the muscle, if they fail to turn on and off at the right time, the system as a whole is affected. Something's going to happen somewhere else. We may not see it or feel it if you're watching someone's movement and you're like, wow, they move great. And they may not feel anything, but all of a sudden something starts to hurt, something breaks down, something gets injured. That's why athletes are always injured. The key here is the sum of the whole system, the function of the whole entire body is only as good as the functioning of each of the individual parts, more specifically the individual muscles. If individual muscles aren't turning on and off the way that they're supposed to, then the whole system is going to be out of whack. That is a principle. That's not, that doesn't happen. That is a principle. We'll tell you how that happens. It means it's a truth. So the note is here. The key we have to understand is just because you move your body doesn't mean the body is moving with free coordinated neuromuscular readiness. So just because you do arm circles or leg swings before you go bench or squat does not mean that your body is ready to do it. Will you warm the tissue up? Yeah, the tissue can be warmed up, probably not after 5 or 6 arm swings and 5 or 6, but it's getting warmer. So you can warm the body up doing almost any type of activity. So you don't have to do aerobic activity. You don't have to jump on a bike. You don't have to. You could walk. You can jog. There's so many things you can do to warm the body up if that's what you want to do. We'll talk about it. You can foam roll. That'll warm your body up. So just because you do certain movements, and this is a big thing because there are certain movements that people do as a warm-up because they see athletes doing them. You'll notice athletes before, they all have kind of a similar warm-up pattern. My biggest question is, there's nothing wrong with any of those movements. It's never the exercise or the movement's fault. It's only the coaches prescribing it or the person doing it that could be the problem. It's not the exercise's fault. It's how do you know that that's the right thing for you? And how do you know that your body's getting benefit from that? You don't, unless you know how your body is capable of moving. So don't think just because you do some swings and you do some bands and you do some, that's actually creating the response in the tissue that you want or need to perform the activity that you're going to do. Here's another one that's a big one, and this is overlooked a lot too. So when we talk about the size principle, we're talking about motor units. So every muscle has different motor units. That means there's different components of the muscle that activate in a sequence. It's called the size principle. And it's called the size principle because that's a principle is a truth. That's how it actually works. So we have type 1s. The type 1s are the lowest activation threshold. They're the ones that activate first. And that's usually under 30% of a maximal force that's being developed or max contraction. The type 2A, they're second, and they're from 30 to 60% basically. That's when they kick in. So that's the orange dot there, the second one from the left. And then you have the type 2X. They activate third, and when you get above 60%, they start to activate. And then you have the type 2B, which is fourth in the line, and that's the 80 to 85%. So we have these 4 basic motor units, muscle fiber types that activate in a sequence, depending on the amount of force that is required to perform the movement that we're doing. This in and of itself should lend itself to having a sequential process to a warm-up, more specifically, because a lot of people, just when you start moving fast, that's no longer a 30% contraction. Even if you have no weight in your hand, if you're just doing this, the force that's going through the tissue is potentially not 30, it could be above that. So you don't know if if you're actually getting type 1 fibers to turn on, and you don't know if they turn on right. Why is that? Because the type 1s have to activate immediately prior to joint, and even prior to joint emotion. If they don't activate on time, they don't turn on and off the way that they're supposed to, which we already talked about in the previous one. If things aren't turning on and off, specifically the type 1, you no longer have joint stability. Those type 1 is what creates joint stability, and joint stability is what allows you to have proper range of motion. If the joint and the brain doesn't sense that that joint is stable, then it's not going to allow reciprocal inhibition, 1, to happen, because it's creating a protective mechanism. It starts to lock the body down, and I'll show you how that works here in a second. And those type 1s need to remain active throughout the whole process to stabilize the joint, no matter how high the forces get. So this is where we have to understand, why does the body have certain fiber types? Is there a reason why it exists? And should I know that if I want to have preparation? The answer is yes. Those type 1s are vital, because everyone's always talking about we need to have power, we need to have force. Well, if you don't have a stable joint, you can have all the power you want in the world, and you can still be strong and powerful, but you'll break. And that's why all athletes get broken at certain times, because they don't go back and address some of these things. And you can. I'm living proof, by the way. So now that you know all that, how the body works, we know that there's a stress response, we know that there's inflammation, we need it. But that inflammation does have effects on the body, but it will go away if the inflammation goes away. We know that there's different motor units and muscle fiber types. We know that there has to be on-off switches that happen in the body. We know that there's all these things that need to occur in order for us to have proper movement. Now, if I have prolonged inflammation that we were talking about, so we start back to the top slides that we were just reviewing. If my inflammation is prolonged and I haven't gotten to a fully recovered position, I have a decrease in proprioception, which means that my muscle spindle is no longer working properly. Remember how important that muscle spindle is? If that muscle spindle isn't working and it's not able to register being put into a shortened position, then it won't allow things to lengthen. And that's where we get tightness. So if I have prolonged inflammation, because I don't know how to assess myself, I don't know how to assess if I'm ready or not to do what I'm supposed to do. Do I still have inflammation? Yes or no? If you don't know how to do that, then you're going to have altered stability in your joints, because you have decrease in muscle spindle activity, and that means that you're no longer able to move the way that you're supposed to. You're not going to have the range of motion that you want. So what happens is, when we have prolonged inflammation, the muscle spindles aren't working properly, and that puts the muscle in a weakened state. So muscles with muscle spindles that can't activate properly, they are actually weak because they can't turn on. The type 1 motor unit that we just talked about cannot be turned on immediately, and if it can't be turned on immediately, we have an unstable joint. So this is how all these things are so vitally important. And that means that we're no longer sending information to the nervous system properly, and that means that we're going to lose our range of motion. And all these things on the right-hand side are just from a specific research article on muscle spindles that say inflammation affects the spindle's ability to activate. When it does, we have improper muscle activation, and that means that we lose degrees of freedom, which means the body starts to tighten up on us. The body doesn't tighten up because tissues just decide to tighten. The body tightens up in a protective mechanism because something is weak and it's unstable. The simple way to do that is think of yourself going and you're walking along the road and all of a sudden you hit ice. When you hit ice, what does your body immediately do? It'll tighten. The whole body tightens up. Why? Because it's protecting itself, because if the joints are just moving all over the place, you're going to slip and fall. And those of us that have done that, we don't enjoy that. So that's why we have tight muscles. And what we try to do is we try to force them to do something that the body's like, well, wait a second, I'm not getting information. You're trying to override what I'm telling you isn't working. So maybe we should flip that, think about flipping that to create a more operative muscle spindle. So the keynote here is muscle weakness is what causes tightness in opposing muscles, and that's how we lose range of motion. So when we're doing all these flexibility and mobility drills to try to improve range of motion, if the nervous system isn't able to register that, just doing that's not going to reset the muscle spindle. It'll override and allow the tissues to move, but then it'll probably go right back to where it was. And then it'll override it. But as you override that, you've destabilized the joint. So those are things that we have to think about. And then last I want to go through is tissue dynamics. Now, when I want to just put all these up here. When we talk about muscles and tissues and we're going to move them and we're swinging things and we want to warm up and we want to do stuff, we have to understand what's actually happening inside under the skin, because we can't see under the skin. If you've never been able to do a cadaver study, then you don't actually know what it looks like under there. So this is from a cadaver study, and I've had the privilege of being with this person and other people in cadaver studies, so you can see the tissue. But if you peel the skin off, that top right corner, that picture, all your tissues are covered in one giant bag. It's a superficial fascial bag. It's just tissue. It's like saran wrap. And then the bottom right picture is if you peeled that layer up, you see all the sticky white stuff that's in that tissue. That's the fascial matrix. It's a fluid. It's like a lubricant fluid that's under there, because that top bag has to move over the bottom bag, which you see underneath there. So you see the bottom right picture, there's like the yellow, that's a fat fascial layer of tissue. You peel that up and then you see kind of the pink layer underneath there. Well, that's the muscular bag around, which you'll see on the left with the person's gloves there. So where the person's gloves are, that's underneath that initial outer bag that you have. Well, that outer bag has to move on that underneath bag right there. And there's all the fluid, like lubricant, in between all of this in the body. And then if you take the bag off where the person's gloves are, if you take that saran wrap layer off, then the actual leg on the other side to the top of the gloves, you can see there's no bag on there, so you can see the muscle strips there. They've cut out all the connective tissue and fascial tissue. All of that tissue, so going from the top tissue has to rub on the bottom tissue where you see the blue gloves. And then underneath all the muscles of that's a thigh, by the way, underneath all those thigh muscles, all the hamstring, the sartorius, the quads, all of those muscles, they have to rub not only against each other, but on that top bag above it, that's on the top bag. So we have all of these tissues that have to slide and glide together. They have to have lubrication. When you are sedentary, or when you've sat, or when you're dehydrated, those tissues get sticky. It's like honey. If you put honey in a refrigerator, that's what that tissue will look like. It's just very gummy and very sticky. Just because you move doesn't mean you necessarily free the tissue in all the areas that it could be stuck. So we need to understand tissue dynamics, and that tissues need to be moved, they need to be manipulated, especially when you're dehydrated, especially when you've been sedentary, especially when you haven't done a lot of movement over time, and even if you've done a lot of repetitive movement. The catch-22 is repetitive motions over and over and over and over and over actually dehydrate tissue, because you're constantly contracting the tissue, which is squeezing fluid out of it. And you can't necessarily get it back fast enough if you constantly keep doing it. So repetitive motions can create dehydration, which that's another reason why repetitive motions can create injury, as well as being sedentary. So we have to make sure that we understand that tissues need to be moved more than just kind of flapping them around or shaking them. So there's nothing wrong with doing all that stuff, but we could be more precise with what we do. Okay, and then lastly, we have different parameters. We have ranges of motion, speed, force, or time under tension or contraction. All of these things affect how tissues move. Smaller ranges of motion have lower amounts of force that they place on the body. Higher ranges of motion have higher amounts of force. Neither one of them is right or wrong or bad or good. It's just, that's the way it is. But if you know that, and then you know how stressed the body or the person is, that should affect how you warm up and cool down. If I have someone who's really stressed, then I don't want to do everything on a high end because that's going to add way more stress to that particular person. But I want to get them prepared. So I should be doing things in a slower, lower fashion if somebody's really stressed. And I'll talk about this in a second. I'm just preparing you. So just know lower speeds, lower forces, higher speeds, higher forces. Lower forces, or lower time under tension versus higher time under tension. Contractions, different contractions have different force levels. That's all vitally important to understand because the way that the tissues are, we can create a very powerful warm up or cool down with lower, slower movement than just always faster movement. If the person's capable of it, yes, we want to get them up into a faster movement, provided that it doesn't decrease from the actual performance they're going to do. So we don't want to have too much time in a warm up or even a cool down for that matter. But let's get a little bit more practical now. So all that said, Patrick, do we have any questions? Is there anything that's really pertinent that we need to talk about right now?
I think the biggest thing is maybe just reviewing quickly how inflammation can decrease range of motion and potentially set somebody up for the feeling of a tight area in the body and what that actually means.
Yeah. So inflammation will basically knock the spindle offline. So the muscle spindle we talked about, that little receptor that's in all muscles and multiple of them in all muscles. The inflammation will actually interfere, and I'm not going to get deep into the science because then it won't make any sense. But the muscle spindle gets essentially, just think of it, it gets knocked offline. It's just no longer able to communicate with the nervous system. So it can't send messages properly to the nervous system, so it can create proper reciprocal inhibition to other musculature to allow movement to happen freely and with free coordination and readiness. So that's how inflammation, prolonged inflammation. So immediately when we do an intense training session, like that first slide was showing us, where when we train, the training response is we get inflammation goes up and then the range of motion and the strength goes down. The reason the range of motion strength goes down is because it's affecting the spindle activity for one of the main purposes. And so it no longer has the same contractility. There's also fatigue components. There's other things that are involved in that, but that's one of the main ones. When that inflammation is prolonged or sustained, that spindle won't come back online. So when it doesn't come back online, that's when the problems happen, because you won't know whether it's online or not. What you'll feel is all of a sudden you just start getting little tightnesses and you get things that feel real. And so whenever we feel a tightness, what we do is try to stretch something instead of saying, wait a second, if this is tight, this might not be working real well. And so for instance, there are times when I've had posterior shoulder pain. And so naturally, when you feel that, people are always trying to do this. You always see people doing this thing where they're stretching. They're forcing themselves to lengthen this because it feels tight. But if you actually were to take your pec and you were to put resistance and give you slight resistance, and we'll talk about this in a second, you would feel a lot of times, many times, it'll start to cramp. These little tiny contractions make your muscles almost cramp. That's because the spindle has no idea what to do and the body's trying to figure it out. But when the cramp goes away, all of a sudden the movement comes right back and everything's stable and there's no pain again. So that's the simplistic way of how inflammation knocks this off and how it can cause tightness in other places. And that's about as basic as I can make it for right now. I hope that helps. Let's get into the application, and I'll talk about that, and hopefully we can have some time to talk about a few things. I know this is going longer than I wanted, so my apologies. So first off, from a practical standpoint, warm-ups and cool-downs are like an on and off ramp to a highway. So I'm sure most of you have been on a highway where you have to get on to and merge with the oncoming traffic. That means you have to speed up and get to the right speed. If you're coming off, that means you have to slow down. So you have to think of these training set, these warm-ups and cool-downs as a transition. We need to transition from whatever we've been doing into what we're going to be doing, and then out of that back into whatever has to happen following our training. They provide us a means to adjust basically the necessary bodily functions so we're ready to go in and out of it. So we're adjusting. We have to adjust our bodies to get them to accommodate what's about to happen to us. We get so focused on the actual training session. Oh, I got to squat, I got to do this. But if you're not preparing your body to do that, you're actually putting more stress on the body. And that's how a warm-up can help a recovery initially. If your body isn't capable and it doesn't have proper activation, it doesn't have proper tissue movement, then when you put the barbell on your back or you're doing whatever exercise you're doing, you're actually putting more stresses on the body than it should have to handle, because you haven't prepared it. It's like you haven't built the right foundation for it to do what it's trying to do yet. Your intensity and duration of a warm-up or a cool down should be dictated by your readiness or the person's readiness and the goal of the session. Those are the two most important factors. What is the ability or the readiness of that person right now, and what's the goal of the training session going to be? That is what should determine what the warm-up and cool down should look like. So here's what that looks like schematically. Your transition 1 is the warm-up, transition 2 is the actual workout, transition 3 is the cool down. So it's an on-ramp and an off-ramp. Depending on the intensity of the training session, are you going to have a red maximal intensity? Then your warm-up might have to be a little bit higher. You might need to have a little bit more time. You might need to ramp that body up in a gradual but poignant fashion to get it to the point where you can jump into that training session. If it's a moderate, then it's a moderate warm-up and cool down. If it's a mild, then it's a mild cool down. So that's as simple as we can make it. You should be adjusting based upon what your program is going to be. General guidelines. So for a warm-up, number 1, you have to know your readiness. If you don't know your readiness, then you don't know how many exercises should I do, what types of exercises should I do. And this is where most people right off the bat are already in a hole, because we don't know if we're ready or not, or if my client is ready or not. And if you don't, then why are you giving them the mobility exercises that you're giving them? Why are you giving them the warm-up that you're giving them? How do you know if that's even right for them? And is it actually preparing them? So number 2, and we'll see this in the Eleiko process and the way that we do it, we have tissue preparation. We prepare the tissue. We increase the lubrication and circulation of the tissue. And then we increase the type 1 muscle fiber activation, because we're doing, and this is where we get neuromuscular readiness. The tissue preparation warms the tissue, and then the muscle activation activates that tissue. So our tissue is ready to do what we want it to do. And the activation that we use is less than a 30% contraction, because we want to isolate the type 1 fibers, which are the primary ones that get knocked offline. Those are the most important to create joint stability. Then we get into movement preparation. We prepare the body for movement with multi-joint free coordinated mobilities. That actually helps to increase the heart rate, the blood flow, and the neuromuscular excitation. So we're now enhancing the neuromuscular excitability based on already having activated tissue. And our activation isn't just taking bands and pulling on them, because most of the time that's about a 50% contraction. That's not doing what we want it to do. And then we have a lower, we want to make sure that the warm-up itself is lower intensity and duration. Rarely should there be over a 15-minute warm-up to get you into the session, because warm-up shouldn't create a fatiguing response. They should just create a warming and a proper tissue preparation response. The body should be prepared to move, not fatigued from that. From a cool down, we still need to know readiness. So how fatigued are you? Because if you're really fatigued, then you don't need to have a 15-minute cool down or a 10-minute cool down. You might need 5 minutes, but what those 5 minutes are could be vital to make the difference between properly returning the body to a calm state or just getting it to cool down. There's a difference between proper re-entry or transition and just cooling yourself down. We want to make sure that we're preparing the tissue to continue to recover now. So we were preparing it to move, now we prepare it to cover, which means we want to maintain that lubrication. We want to maintain that circulation and maintain the type 1 muscle fiber activation. So if you've done a pretty intense workout, you might have decreased some of the spindle activity. Well, you can reboot that at the end of your training session to optimize your recovery. And that works really well by just so you know from personal experience. And then obviously it's lower intensity, so less than 50% of your heart rate, whereas you can get up to about 70-75% with your warm up as a general. Again, under 15 minutes. You don't need to go long. If you do a proper warm up, you have proper programming in your training session, and then you have a good cool down. This is the strategy that we use. We use foam rolling, we use activation techniques, then we have what we call mobilizers, which are low force integrated motion, and we have the higher force mobility exercises that we can use. So we have a stand. Now, all 4 of those do not need to be used all of the time. However, depending on what stress level the person is, should dictate where you go with that. If someone's highly stressed, and depending on what their level of activity normally is, mobilizers can be awesome to warm somebody up because they're just slow rhythmical motions. I'll talk about that. If someone's a little bit more athletic and they have a higher advanced thing they need to go through, then they may need to do some mobility drills that have specific things. So it should be based upon the person. The bottom line is, if we are training people correctly, not everyone does the same training, and not everyone does the same training every day, because everybody changes from day to day and everybody has different ability levels. So we need to make sure that if we're going to personalize training sessions, and you can personalize group sessions, that's not difficult, based upon their stress level. But if we're going to personalize training sessions, we should be personalizing the warm-ups and cool-downs to map to the person, because your warm-up and cool-down could potentially be adding more stress to the person. By either not doing a proper warm-up, you're putting more stressful forces on the body, which is adding more stress to that person. Doing a proper warm-up, you can decrease some of the unnecessary forces that are going through the body. And if you do a proper cool down, you can alleviate and enhance the recovery process. If you don't do those, you're putting a lot more forces on the body without a way for the water to get out of the bucket. So that's the simple process. So how do we assess recovery? Here it is. If you don't know this and you've never heard this, go to our website and download this. Just go to the education, eleiko.com/education, go to the training tools and find the raw score. This is a game changer. So you can subjectively measure, which is all scientifically validated, what a person's basic stress level is or their recovery status for that particular time. So this is how you know if someone's ready or not, or how ready they are. You just simply ask these 4 questions from these 4 pillars. We look at their sleep, their physical, their mood, and their nutrition. So if you were to rate yourself, and those of you that are on here, just rate yourself. So you look at the sleep. So how many hours of sleep have you had, and are you well rested? So if you don't feel well rested, you haven't had a lot of sleep, then you're a 3. If you are very well rested and you've had good sleep, then you're a 3. If you haven't had good sleep and you haven't had a lot of time and you don't feel rested, you're a 1. So on a scale of 1 to 3, you're going to rate yourself in each one of these. Do you have a lot of pain and soreness and tightness? Do you have a little bit, or do you have none? So you're 1, 2, or 3. Your mood, you feel kind of agitated and stressed, or you just kind of blah and neutral, or you kind of vivacious and have vitality, vibrant, and ready to roll. That's a 3. Nutrition, have you had poor, fair, or good quality and timing of nutrition? And that's how you can rate yourself. So if you're a 10 to 12, that means you have minimal stress. You're good to go. You can do basically whatever you wanted to do as long as it's within your ability level for that day. 7 to 9, you need to decrease your volume. And 4 to 6, you need to decrease your volume more. And so how much is that? 4 to 6, basically decrease the volume by about 25 to 30%. And that could be just by cutting out sets and reps. You don't have to change load depending on what you're training for. Again, it goes back to what's the actual point or purpose of the training session. If you're in a high intensity training session, then you can still train with the loads or speeds that you're doing. You just have to shrink how much of that you're doing. Okay, so 20 to 25% volume. And then if you're in a 7 to 9, it's about a 15 to 20% reduction in volume. Because that raw score tells you how much stress you already have in your bucket based upon how much you have. So if you're a 4 to 6, you got a lot of water in your bucket. If you're a 10 to 12, you got a little bit of water in your bucket. So based upon what you already have, that training session can only allow you to have so much more. And if you don't know that, you will actually get sick, or you will create some type of musculoskeletal injury, and you can almost guarantee it. And you can almost predict it if you track it. And I've done that with many clients. Okay. So if you're looking at the individual, whether it's sleep or it's physical or it's mood or it's the nutrition, if you look at the individually things from a sleep standpoint, when you're using your warm up and cool down, really focus on the tissue prep. That'll be vitally important, having good tissue prep and maybe some mobilizers. Okay, if someone hasn't had good sleep. If that's like if they have a 1 in the sleep, but everything else is fairly good, that's what you'd want to really focus on. From a physical standpoint, just use the process as it is if they have physical issues, because the process is designed to set the body up for success by addressing the inadequacies in the tissues. If you have a mood issue where they're a low score in the mood, they have a 1 in just the mood, and that's their primary issue, then that's where you want to engage the person. Do something fun with them. So when you're warm up, especially, get them to do something fun. An example that I had, very simple example, I had a client that used to love to play tennis. So what I would do is, there was time that she came in and she was a 1 and she was down. I mean, she was just, her mood was down. And so I just got a tennis ball out and I just started throwing a tennis ball back and forth to her, and she started talking. And within about, I would say about 20, 30 seconds, all of a sudden she started throwing the tennis ball real hard at me. So she started getting competitive. She had talked and got some things out, and all of a sudden she was feeling much better. So her readiness went from not so good to very good literally within minutes, just because we engaged her because it was a mood issue, not necessarily a physical issue. From a nutrition standpoint, this is probably for most clients or for most of you. If you're dehydrated, especially, drink water during that tissue prep. The tissue prep will actually draw water into the body if you're drinking it. And I won't go into the dynamics of that, but do water, drink like at least 8 to 12 ounces of water in that tissue prep if someone comes in and they're fairly dehydrated. Also, if there's, from a nutrition standpoint, they don't have anything in them, get them something that is easily digest, whether it's a juice, some type of fruit, or some type of, they got gels and all kinds of things, something that they can get in their body, because that will help them to be in a much better place for their training session. So from a tissue preparation standpoint, we start with foam roll. This is to create circulation, lubrication, because as you foam roll, you actually are moving the tissues. 1, you're going to warm yourself up so the tissues are warm, but 2, you're actually moving, sliding, and gliding those tissues and getting them to free themselves from the adhesion that's in there. That's part of what foam rolling should be doing. Don't worry about all the range of motion. We're so focused on range of motion, and we're doing half the things wrong to get the range of motion, and we're actually fatiguing people instead of helping them. These are all research reviews that talk about all the benefits, but most importantly, it improves vascular and parasympathetic function. That means it's creating circulation. That's what it means, and lubrication. It reduces muscle soreness. It's been shown to do that before and after. If you foam roll before and after, that can reduce soreness, which is a good thing because that's helping to decrease the amount of inflammation. It can still increase range of motion without impeding performance or proprioception, which is vitally important. But don't try to roll for hours and hours and hours. So when we do it, 5 to 15 seconds on a specific area is plenty of time to get the adaptation or the influence on the tissue that you want and you need. 1 to 3 seconds per roll, and we only do one set. I've never rolled anyone more than once on a specific area. Okay, you can do that in both the warm-up and cool-down. And in the links that you have, you'll see that you can actually foam roll your entire body in about 2 minutes, a little over 2 minutes. And so it's a big difference in what we normally see. Activation. So the main purpose of activation is to reset the muscle spindle, so that increases reciprocal inhibition, and reactivate the muscle, and that's how we get stability of the joint, which allows mobility and range of motion instantly. Okay, the procedure for that, and this is specifically talked about in our readiness and recovery training course. We specifically go through all the foam rolls and all of the specific activation techniques and range of motion assessments. We do all of that in that course, so I highly suggest to get that if you want more information. But the procedure is you place the muscles in their shortened position, and then you perform a low intensity, longer duration isometric contraction in that shortened end range position. So the intensity is literally a 1 to 2 on a scale of 10. So you want to stay under that 30% threshold. So we focus on the type 1s, and it'll make a drastic change in how you feel. And you're doing about 3 to 6 sets for 3 to 6 seconds at a time. And that says 3 to 6 seconds times 3 to 6 reps. No, it's, you want to do, yes, you're going to do 3 to 6 repetitions, but they're going to be for 3 to 6 seconds at a time. So for instance, a lot of people have tight hamstrings and they'll stretch the hamstring, but they never actually activate the hip flexor. So my suggestion is if you're having tightness in your hamstring, and there are a myriad of things that will cause tightness in the hamstring, and it's not the hamstring's fault. That's a whole nother webinar. But if you just get your leg up in a straight leg and you have a hard time doing that, get it to where you'll see my hand is on my quad. What I'm doing is I'm pressing lightly my leg. I've raised my leg up and I'm pressing it lightly into my hand, creating a low level isometric contraction in a shortened hip flexor position. And if you do that 3 to 6 times for 3 to 6 seconds, you'll see that that range of motion starts to increase. That's because you're addressing the spindle function and not tearing the hamstring and just trying to get it and force it. So if you have tightness in the quad, maybe you need to activate the hamstring. So in the bottom one, I'm actually pushing my heel against my hand and creating my hamstring. You'll find that, and I won't be surprised if some of you actually do that and your hamstring cramps on you and it doesn't feel good. However, when it cramps, that's telling you that that spindle has no clue what it's supposed to do, and that's why you have tightness in the quad. You've just proved yourself what we're talking about. If I want internal rotation of the shoulder and I lack internal rotation, put yourself in internal rotation and just press lightly against your hand so you can actually start activating the internal rotators. If I can't activate the internal rotators properly, then my external rotators will start to feel tight. And so people are trying to stretch the posterior delt instead of getting internal rotation. So whatever you're feeling tight, go the opposite way with it and try to create a shortness. But if you want to be precise about it, go get the readiness and recovery training course because we walk you through that. Mobilizers, I'm going to kind of skim through this real fast. Mobilizers is just slow motion. All we're doing is you're just moving, and the key with that is you want to perform them slow and rhythmically, like you're moving in water. You don't want to make any waves. That doesn't threaten the body, so the body isn't getting into a stretch reflex. It's actually just moving real fluid. And so what you'll feel is when you're done with doing 5 to 8 of those repetitions, the body, the word that we hear all the time, because I've been doing this for over 15 years now, the word we hear all the time is, I just feel more stable versus when I try to do something really fast or really stretch. The body just feels more stable because you've created lubrication and you haven't threatened the body to where it's trying to react and tense itself up, because that's what it'll do. If you stretch too fast, the muscle spindles are respond to stretch and the speed of stretch, as well as shortening and the speed of shortening, okay? So we just do them real slow, and that just, like I talked about, just helps, especially people who are stressed. This can really help bring their body back to a level because you're not over fatiguing them in a warm-up, and you're still getting the tissues to move, especially if you've done tissue prep. You've done some foam roll and some activation prior to that. Okay, and then obviously we can go with the mobility and those dynamic exercises. We can get compressed progressively faster and larger ranges of motion to benefit whomever we need to, depending on their level of stress. Make sure that you can control that speed and you can control the motion. So the keynote here is just because you do something faster or you have more range of motion does not necessarily mean it's better. And I don't care who the person is. If you don't threaten the body and force it to do something that it can't do and doesn't want to do, especially when someone's in a stress state, you can actually increase their ability for injury risk when you can't control and do those movements because you're putting too much on the body. And I'm speaking from years of experience having used this stuff with multiple clientele. So again, simple stuff for the warm-ups and cool-downs, things to consider. Number one, volume. How much time are you going to spend? Do you need to spend? And that's based upon your raw score. What did your raw score say? How stressed are they? And what is the purpose of your actual training session? And then how many exercises are you going to do? And that's going to be the same for the end, the cool down. How many exercises do I need to do and how much do I need to do with that person based on how fatigued they are? As a general rule of thumb, if you just did some of the tissue preparation as part of your cool down, that would be money. That would be 100 times better than what most people do. And you guys know, we're all guilty of it. A lot of times we finish our training session and the walk to the car, the ride home, that's our cool down. That doesn't actually do the most benefit for us. So how many exercises, how much time in the exercise selection? What applications are you going to do and what exercises are you going to be performing? What do you need to actually work on? One of the things with cool downs is people tend to say, stretch the muscles that you just worked. I'm going to give you a little tip. If you're stretching muscles that are already fatigued, stretching will fatigue the muscle. Stretching does not reset the spindle, it actually heightens the dysfunction of the spindle. So not only is that muscle maybe tight because of something else that's not working right, means your hip flexor or your glute or some other thing, that those spindles may not be working properly. But if you're cranking on a hamstring because it's feeling tight, especially after a workout, you may actually decrease the ability to hamstring do. So now what you've done is you've just decreased more, but you've never reset anything. So that's why we want to be more precise with our warm-ups and our cool-downs and what strategies we use. Okay, and that's it. I know that we're kind of at the end of time. Actually, we're way over, and I'm so sorry. There's so much information that I couldn't get to everything. So if there's still people on here and you have questions, I'll be more than happy to stay on as long as you want, or as long as you will allow yourself to answer whatever questions you have. So forgive me for going over, but there's so much more information to talk about than just, hey, do this stretch or do that drill or do this. It's bigger and deeper than that. So Patrick, I'll shut up, and if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer.
I think I got the answers on the back end here. So no more further questions. Thank you, Rodney. That was a lot of great information and practical applications, the most important part. So thank you for that.
No problem. And for all those people who stayed on, deeply appreciate it. And our next webinar will be next month. Just be looking out for some of the information. Will be on squat. So we're going to start talking about some of the essential fundamentals for squat and how to do those more effectively. So we'll be looking at the beauty of the squat. Thank you all. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your month. We'll talk to you soon.